Good morning. Welcome to the live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. Our opening hymn this morning is "I Wish I Knew How" from the Singing the Living Tradition. Please sit back and enjoy the hymn. I'm Dinah Rowe, a member of the Board of Trustees, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from today include Alec Peck singing our songs. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. Our Unitarian heritage calls us to recognize the inherent good of all persons, while the Universalist part of our tradition encourages us to extend love and acceptance to all people. You are welcome to this congregation, whatever your gender identity, racial identity, faith, tradition, or class. Our principles call us to affirm the worth and dignity of every individual, to accept one another, and to foster each other's spiritual growth. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. The author of today's sermon is Amanda Eudice Kessler. She is a hymn writer, songwriter, composer, and writer who specializes in music and lyrics for liberal, progressive, religious people and communities, including inclusive, social justice-minded Christians, Unitarian Universalists, and other open-minded open-hearted religious traditions. Amanda's religious music is in use across the U.S. and in Canada, the U.K., South Africa, and New Zealand. She has served informally as composer in residence at Vista Grande Community Church, UCC, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and also informally as the consulting long-distance music director for Affirming God's People, UCC in Las Vegas, Nevada. Amanda was the featured hymn writer, composer for the fall 2020 through summer 2021 issues of the UCC Musicians Associated Journal Worship, Music and Journal and Ministry. She is also the June 2021 Musician of the Month at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Greater Lansing, Michigan. The sermon description is as follows: White supremacy and beloved community. Unitarian Universalism is currently taking a boldly, profoundly important step in committing to work as an entire body, a beloved community against white supremacy. In order to make this commitment as effective as possible, it is important to reflect on the internal struggle that we who are white may undergo as we come to recognize, accept the reality of, and commit to working against white supremacy. These responses and emotions can halt us in our tracks as we can recognize them and work with them to enable ourselves to move forward and support each other along the way. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, a symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of indigenous peoples, including the Korea, the Capeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is The Promise and the Practice by Rebecca Savage. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. This portion of our service is for greeting our guests. If there is someone online who would like to introduce themselves, please use the Zoom's raised hand option or ask to speak using the chat and we will call upon you. Please let us know who you are and where you're from and how you found out about us. Adam, do we have anybody online visitors today who would like to speak? For new visitors, if you wish to get added to the mailing list, please email the church office. There are a few announcements we would like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all this information, and it is also available on our website. Next Sunday, February 20th, we will open our doors for in-person services. There will be a bake sale after the service on that day. On February 19th, the Supper Club will meet at Ancho's in Riverside. Please contact Pat Kawunder to get added to the reservation. Call the church office or check your church directory for Pat's number. All are welcome to attend. Our hymn now is "O My Shepherd" by Amanda Eudice Kessler. We invite you to sit back, listen, and enjoy.
My shepherd, lead me, guide me, haunt me, push me, move my heart. When I ache for stiller waters, keep me on my feet. Bring me to the street, help me not retreat. Lead me in the path of justice, send me to resist the violence. Tempted as I am to silence, comfort me and raise my voice. Help me make the harder choice. Oh, my shepherd, I have walked through whitest valleys far too long, fearing what I thought was evil, causing harm and doing wrong. Help me sing a different song. Where I stumble, make me strong. I have lingered at the table, safe and sated, unaware, failing in my joy to notice all the ones who weren't there. All the ways the world's unfair, all the ways I didn't care. Oh, my shepherd, fill my cup with heartbreak so it overflows. Pour the oil of deep compassion down upon me till I know how to face the devastation, how to work to heal the nation. my shepherd, may I be a shepherd of my very own, leading others into goodness, guiding others into mercy, living proof that you have called us to rebuild your shattered home as a place where all of us shall dwell as one our whole lives long.
This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. You may send your checks to the church address, which is shown. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the church website and also in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater grocery cards, which are in the church office. You get the full value, and the church also receives a percentage. Amazon cards are also available. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity, and to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Our next hymn is From You I Receive.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive.
Our meditation today is All of Us Need All of Us to Make It by Megan Foley and Teresa Soto. Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Teresa Soto writes, all of us need all of us to make it. I want you to get used to these words. Make them your prayer. All of us need all of us to make it. This is why Unitarian Universalists support the Black Lives Matter movement. Please take a moment to center the struggle for Black lives in our thoughts. Say it with me, loud and soft. All of us need to make it. In a world where some of us are targeted for struggle and brutality, where others of us benefit and flourish, we pray. All of us need all of us to make it. In a world where powerful people of ill will and indifference make us fearful for our safety and our futures, we pray. All of us need all of us to make it. In the excruciating space that lives between seeing and naming and hearing and changing, we pray. All of us need all of us to make it. Make a picture in your mind of someone you aren't very happy with right now. Look at their face in your mind and say, all of us need all of us to make it. Universalist Unitarians believe that all of us need all of us to make it. This is why we're in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives Matter today and every day. Amen. Now let's take a pause for a moment of silence. Now I would like to introduce UUCR member Alec Peck, reading the sermon, White Supremacy and Beloved Community by Amanda Eudes Kessler.
Thank you, Dano. Before I begin with Amanda's words, I'm going to add a brief introduction to give our topic some context. Whiteness, critical examinations of race, and instances of overt, violent racism have been hot cultural topics recently. With that discussion, I've seen a lot of confusion about what whiteness and white supremacy are, and I think some of that is a deliberate obfuscation by white supremacists, but most of that comes from a naivety and denial, which Amanda will talk about shortly. For that reason, I think it will be helpful to ground ourselves and really define what we're talking about here. Merriam-Webster gives the first definition of white supremacy as, quote, the belief that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over other people of other races, unquote. Functionally, this is more of an historic definition. This was a supposedly scientific explanation for why good white Christians didn't need to treat humans like humans and why it was morally right to exterminate, subjugate, or extort other peoples. In the westward expansion of the US, it was whiteness which determined who had the right to claim land. However, in practical discussions of white supremacy, we're really talking about Merriam-Webster's second definition, quote, the social, economic, and political systems that collectively enable white people to maintain power over people of other races, unquote. White supremacy refers to the direct consequences of this outdated belief. Make no mistake, some people do still believe in that first definition today, but most people don't. And yet we do live in a society which is built on those virtues. And the roots of colonialization have seeped into every facet of our society. White supremacy demands that there is an in-group who can think that the right things and will build the right society. The existence of this in-group justifies disregard for the inherent worth of the out-group, and the mechanism which defines these groups is whiteness. Whiteness is a hard concept to really grasp because that's all it really is, an identifier of being in the right group. It's not about color or nationality or genetics or culture. Whiteness is nothing but a lack of racialization. And this is why the specific nationalities, which are considered white, have historically been quite flexible. I don't believe in the first definition of white supremacy, but I am still part of this in-group, and so I am still a part of white supremacy. It would be convenient if racism meant just that some individuals held this belief of racial hierarchy, but racism manifests on every level of society, which is built on having a racial in-group. However, hopefully, our conversation today can help in our goal of reaching a world community which recognizes the systematic issues which have arose from humanity's stumbling through the universe. And now, Amanda's sermon, White Supremacy and Beloved Community. Unitarian Universalism is currently taking profound, important steps in committing to work as an entire body, a beloved community against white supremacy. In order to make this commitment as effective as possible, it is important to reflect on the internal struggle of who we are as white, that who we are as white may undergo as we come to recognize and accept the reality of and commit to working against white supremacy. These responses and emotions can halt us in our tracks, or we can recognize them and work on them and enable ourselves to move forward and to support each other along the way. We might view this process as a set of stages. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross suggested that there were 5 stages of grief. In contrast, one might envision at least 11 stages of emotional struggle around accepting white supremacy as a white person. The stages don't always happen in order. They can overlap. We may move back and forth between them. They are denial, resistance, discomfort, defensiveness, guilt, fear, paralysis, anger, sadness, resignation, and commitment. Even those of us who are further along than denial may not be living in commitment full time, but we may be there at least part of the time, and we can work towards being there more of the time. How do white people first engage with white supremacy? Often, we don't. We reject the idea that racism is still present and harming people. We say, we've had a Black president. How bad could it be? We say, Oprah seems to be doing pretty well, but we ignore the fact that upscale jewelry stores have refused to let her in since Black people surely don't have enough money for expensive jewelry. We say proudly that we are colorblind and that we don't care whether people are white, Black, yellow, red, or purple, signaling by our mention of purple people that we are not taking the whole matter terribly seriously. The stage of denial may not involve deep-seated unconscious ability to see what's right in front of us. We may simply be insanely busy and focused in our day-to-day lives. We may be struggling with our own challenges. We may well be ignorant to the depth of continuing white supremacy today. Once we confront the reality and enormity of racism, we may move to resistance. We don't want this to be true. We are being forced to see what's going on, and we hate and resent it, thank you very much. Our path through resistance may feel like an adult temper tantrum minus the actual kicking and screaming. After we've spent some time resisting the reality of white supremacy, we may become uncomfortable. We start figuring out the implications of racism for our own lives, and we may start to wonder if we are bad people, what our friends of color think of us, or whether our successes have always been due to our hard work and talent as opposed to preferential treatment. Perhaps it's not surprising then that distress may lead to defensiveness. My family didn't own slaves, we may say. I have Black friends, we may say. I would never use a racial slur, we may say. The list goes on and on, but it's all in service of our attempts to rescue our wounded feelings and say that at some level, this is not all about us. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, it is about us, because who else would it be about? Once we cannot avoid that fact, we may have to struggle with guilt. Guilt because we benefit from white supremacy. Guilt because, truth be told, we like not being stopped by the police when we're doing 50 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone because we're a little late for church. Guilt because we could be resisting racism more actively than we are pretty much all of the time. Guilt that we resent having to deal with this topic at all. Then there's fear. We may be afraid of appreciating racism. We don't want to say that the wrong things in a social justice context and embarrass ourselves. And we may fear that what will happen if we start taking personal responsibility for working against racism. We think we might become that person, the one who awkwardly interrupts racist comments and jokes, the one who calls people out, making them uncomfortable and becoming uncomfortable ourselves, the one who might risk friendships, family relationships, even jobs to point out racist words and actions right in front of us, promulgated by people we love, people we respect, and people who pay us. At about this point, we might find ourselves emotionally immobilized, paralyzed by a combination of helplessness and hopelessness. We know that having good intentions about being part of a solution means very little on its own. We might want to do the right thing, and sometimes we succeed, but not often enough, it seems. The enormity of racism, the horrific powers of its impact on people of color, and the relatively little that it seems we can do come together. But we may eventually break through the paralysis and get to some pretty deep anger. Anger that the systems that hurt people, anger at the individuals who hurt other people, anger at the people who don't see the harm or perhaps do see it, but do not care about it. Anger that this commitment to work for racial justice is so hard, even that it is definitely the right commitment to make. Anger that every time the country makes 2 steps forwards on racial equality, it makes at least 1 step back. And unsurprisingly, underneath everything else we've encountered is deep, abiding sadness, grief for light years. Sadness that white supremacy ever came to pass at all, grief that the suffering endured by people of color, grief, sadness that some people feel so disrespected that they have to find someone else to look down on. Sadness that the many profound gifts that people of color have to offer to the world in many cases are not available because the individuals in question are not able to get good education, or they experience violence, or they encounter the criminal justice system and are treated unfairly by it, or aren't taken seriously because they are seen as culturally inferior. And eventually we get to resignation. We can deny it, we can resist it, we can rage or cry, but there it is, white supremacy. How we feel about it is beside the point. Our intentions are beside the point. We trust good evidence, and the evidence is compelling both historically and in the present. White supremacy is real. So now what are we going to do about it? I can't unlearn what we have learned. We have agreed to be uncomfortable for the rest of our lives, and we are as fine with that as we can be. And finally, we begin to reach the closest thing to a final stage: commitment. The willingness to stay in solidarity, to keep learning, to keep listening, to contribute where we can. It can be hard to stay in those zones, but once we have a taste of commitment, we know for sure how important this work is, and we will keep returning to it. Denial, resistance, discomfort, defensiveness, guilt, fear, paralysis, anger, sadness, resignation, commitment. These are the places that we might find ourselves as we move from a cluelessness about racism to a degree of understanding and a pledge to be part of the solution. Moving through the stages of confronting both racial structures of society and our place in them is profoundly difficult, but fortunately, we do not have to do it alone. In fact, we can't do it alone. If we work together, we can support each other in our difficult growth process, in our understanding of white supremacy, and in our willingness to be in solidarity with communities of color. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us who are in denial about white supremacy by gently and non-judgmentally being witness to its reality. We can bring up the topic. We can talk about our own experiences of understanding ourselves as colorblind and describe what changed. We can comment on racism as it appears around us. We can ask questions that reveal the double standards hidden in some kinds of talk about race, such as inquiring when someone mentions black on black crime. Why are they not also talking about white on white crime, since almost all crime is intraracial due to racial segregation? These actions are difficult to take, and we are likely to be uncomfortable taking them. But if our actions make one's life easier, freer, or richer, our discomfort is worth it. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us who resist the reality of white supremacy simply by being good listeners, providing an open and non-anxious presence for them. And this can continue into the phases of discomfort and defensiveness. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us struggling with the guilt related to being white in a white supremacist society, both by being supportive and by pointing out some realities that can be helpful. It is only human to be grateful for inequality when it benefits us. It is only natural to resent having to spend our precious time, money, and energy trying to end something that we did not ask to exist in the first place, it is only reasonable to react with stress when we can't hold back the ocean with a bucket, and we feel that we should try even harder, even when we know it is not sustainable. If we can jettison our guilt, we will be more free to take up responsibility for being part of the solution. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us struggling with fear by telling our stories, by showing how we got through difficult situations, whether those situations involved falling on our face in front of activists of color or having a painful conversation with a friend or relative. For many of us, when it comes to fear, the only way out is through. We may make fewer mistakes over time, and for those difficult conversations and experiences of calling out people, the second time we might be less afraid, and the third time we may be less afraid still. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us struggling with paralysis, immobilization, helplessness, and hopelessness by pointing out the historical successes of the civil rights movements and the multitudes who fight on today. And we ourselves can be models for action, however modest and preliminary. Doing anything is better than nothing. We know this, and we can demonstrate it. We, the beloved community, can respond to those among us struggling with anger and sadness and resignation in the same way as we respond to those earlier stages, with good listening, gentle support, and great compassion. We love each other through the difficulty and into acceptance of and engagement with white supremacy in the many ways that we might work against it. And so finally, we, the beloved community, welcome those who have reached the final stage of commitment, even as we struggle to stay committed ourselves. We care for one another and encourage one another. We celebrate progress and mourn the continued losses and keep at it day after day, year after year. When we, as the beloved community, make these promises and act on them, we join the prophetic people who make up the history of Unitarianism and Universalism, and those who are hard at work in today's Unitarian Universalism. And with these promises and actions, we proclaim our commitment to a world bursting with joy for all people, a world where people of color do not need to confront racial slurs, discrimination, or violence, a world where no one needs to specify that Black Lives Matter because it is patently obvious that they do. We don't live in that world yet, but we are working on a way towards it, one person at a time, one action at a time, one stage at a time, and we are taking care of each other along the way. By confronting the reality of white supremacy head-on, we build a world where such white supremacy is only a bad memory, so we may build this world alone and together every day of our lives. Amen, and blessed be.
Our closing hymn is number 153 from Singing the Living Tradition. Oh, I woke up this morning.
Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I was walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Our benediction this morning is Go in Peace, Seeking Justice by Jim McGaw. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace, seeking justice. I mean go in peace, committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean go in the peace that is created when together. We build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Alec, for sharing your valuable time and reading the sermon for us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again. We're going to have about a 10 to 15-minute discussion following the service to share any observations or impressions you may have. To be aware that this will be included in the video.
Great. Yeah, if anyone on Zoom would like to comment, you're free to unmute yourselves and please share your thoughts. John, I see, has a hand up.
I understand that the UUA is considering passing what they're calling an eighth principle that's dealing with beloved. Are you familiar with that?
I believe you're referring to the potential eighth principle, which we may be adding.
That's true.
Yes, it's a little bit wordy, but the proposed eighth principle is that we affirm and promote the dismantlement of racism and other systematic oppressions which affect communities on a large scale, which very clearly ties into a few of our principles as well. Did you have a comment on that, John?
Yeah, the only comment I had was that I know that some congregations appear to be in favor of it, and some congregations seem to think we don't need it because it's covered by the other 7. So I was just kind of curious to what people's thoughts were on it.
Yes. If you give me a moment, I will find what the eighth principle says, and perhaps we can get some discussion on it, because I attended a very interesting eighth principle discussion at the UU Church of Las Vegas, where they had a very fruitful discussion about their thoughts on it. But in the meantime, Pat has their hand up. So Pat, would you like to share your thought, and then I'll share the potential eighth principle with us?
I was going to ask you to read the eighth principle. That was one of the things. But the other thing I wanted to say, I've been part of a book group that's reading some of the recent nonfiction and fiction about supporting Black Lives Matter and the continuation of racism. And it's really astonishing. I didn't know it. I mean, how could you grow up in this country and not get it? But it's really changed the way I see things and how terribly Black people are treated. And it's random. I mean, they never know when it's going to happen. I'm really, at first when the UU was concerned, I was like, it's over. Come on, we've got a Black president. But I get it. It's really an important thing. And I'm glad that UU is being serious about it. But I don't know if I agree with the 8th principle. Did you find it?
Yes, I have it to share here.
Yeah, would you read it?
Our 8th principle: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. And Lee has a hand up to give the next thought as we ponder that 8th principle.
Thank you, Alec. Quick question that I was thinking about while I was listening to that sermon being read. Are not the roots of white supremacy, which is historically manifested in European colonization, empire building, resource theft, destruction of indigenous religions and cultures, and in genocide, actually rooted in the in-group, out-group covenantal supremacies of the 3 major Abrahamic religions?
Whoa. Wow.
And that's a deep question, Lee, one that we should all think about seriously. Tinka.
Yes, I would like for us as a I would like for us as a community here at UUCR to, when we're able to come back together and everything, just keep this as a goal, I guess, with this 8th principle being put out there, and with our democratic process within our, within our religion, that we all should be looking at this deeply on a personal level, and I think also as a congregation. I would love for us to do like a series, I don't know, like a 8-week series, 6-week series, something like that, where we, like what Pat was saying, like in terms of books to read to spark us perhaps into a deeper way of thinking of this, or broadening our minds, or raising questions that maybe we ourselves don't think of. And then having discussions where we come together and talk about it. And I think that, I know we did that in the past, in terms of the LGBTQ issues that were coming forward. And I think that would be something that would be good for us to do, with this 8th tradition. It is important, I mean, that's going to, be added to, I know we don't have a creed, but it's going to be added to probably the closest thing that we have to a creed as to what we all agree on. And I think it would be important for us to look at that down in our souls and how we think about it and broaden our minds about it. And then, come to some personal awareness and decision on it. So that's what I put out there for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tinka. I would like to briefly give my thoughts on the 8th principle. First, it is considerably wordier than our other principles, which is a bit of a linguistic issue, perhaps. But I think in terms of what it's trying to say, I do think that there is room for that, because I like to think of our principles as being sort of a basis for how we define moral behavior, what we consider to be, what it means to be a good person. And there's definitely a lot of overlap with what's written here, with namely the first principle, the inherent respect for the inherent worth of individual peoples, the third principle, the encouragement of spiritual growth within our community, and the sixth principle, the goal of a world's community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. However, racism and other oppressions very similar to it, racism being certainly the most prevalent one because it's the one which our in particular, specifically our society happens to be built primarily on, but there are others important ones as well. This is the system of racism and other oppressions is sort of emergent on a higher level. It manifests itself on sort of on those sort of community-wide levels. But when you try to go and look on the individual level, you still see it, but it takes a very different form. And the way that these systems of oppression manifest themselves, going from the individual actions which are racist to how that results in the fact, that it's surely perhaps it's not a coincidence that all these Black communities happen to not have as much income. This is a direct result of all the historic conditions that led to that. And that is sort of an emergent property of the entire system of living as a community of humans all living together. And we need to and if we can't define rigorously how these injustices manifest from the individual level to the societal level, then we won't be able to accurately confront them. I see Bill has a hand up.
Unmute. Okay. First of all, I'd like to say it's nice to be here. I'm still getting used to the Zoom system, so I apologize for being late. What I wanted to build onto was what Lee had said. He talked about the Abrahamic religions having a hand in it. I would submit that first there is the fear of the other. You know, the guy from a different tribe who dresses differently, and you're afraid of him. And somewhere along the lines, somebody learns how to make money on this deal. And I would submit that this racism we have, this fighting of tribe for tribe, color against color, that it primarily has to do with maybe, okay, that's a bad sentence. It has something to do with resources, money, and how much of it you get to keep. And if I get to suppress your tribe and keep your stuff, then it goes into my tribe and I can put it to work and get the interest off of it. And one of the sad things about the 21st and 20th century is it's never one thing. It's always some combination.
We also have Pat has a hand up.
I just want to support what Bill said. But the idea of reparations, I don't know. The whole thing is so complex. It's really, and having lived in the South, I know the incredible resistance to any kind of attempt to redress the past. I don't have solutions. Also, I agree with Alec that the principle is so wordy. I hate it. I think it's terrible. We ought to be better word people, but if that's what's being considered, maybe if that's the only choice we have, I guess I would say that let's go with it, because I agree that the problem is so egregious that it needs to have attention drawn to it. The whole problem of the difference in the way the history of Black people and versus the us. Ugh. I like the idea that Tinka said about having a book group. I could, if anybody does, I've already done it mostly, but I could certainly give recommendations from the book group I've been in. We've been meeting for over a year, and lots of really good books about these issues that were eye-opening for me. The other thing I brought up last week, that Linda Van Voorhees and I are thinking of doing a maybe an 8-week or something, maybe once a month, I don't know, anyway, of exploring how to implement the 7 principles in our lives. I would really like to address that. I think that's where I would go next with my spirituality. And I mentioned it last week, and I didn't get any feedback. If anybody's interested in participating or supporting something like that, please let me know, because we would like to do it, but I don't know when we would start, and it would depend on the interest level. And maybe people would rather do racism, I don't know. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. I see there are a few hands up, but we have someone here, Grace, in the hall, who has a comment. Right? Grace, why don't you come up and speak? And I do see your hands, but I also want to. Oh, and Adam also has so many hands. But I wanted to say that I am going to exert my privilege to insert a quick sentence. We're going to have our worship committee meeting where I intended to discuss possible plans for doing something like that. And so if you're available to join us by Zoom, then that would be wonderful. But now, Adam and Grace, in any order, I suppose, and then Lee and John on the chat in that order. I don't think that's getting through. Why don't you come up and speak? Why don't you just...
So I was saying that I think racism is an extremely profound and interesting topic to speak about. What comes to mind is when there was anti-Asian violence that was going on, I think it was a few months ago or whatever, because of coronavirus. One of the Asian victims said something like, "Love me as much as you love our food." That being said, I think that the fight against racism is primarily a fight against ignorance. I think the more you understand other cultures, the more you're exposed to them, the more you learn about them, you start to realize that it's not about race. It's about knowledge and inclusion and realizing that actually, no matter what color you are, you're human first. And once you start realizing that, all the barriers start coming down a little bit. It's not easy, but it is definitely possible.
And
I don't think this is...
all right, you can hear me because I'm right here.
So I just want to say I really like the idea, Tinka, that you talked about us forming a group to talk about white supremacy in our faith and in our lives and how that affects us, and looking at that eighth principle. I also want to say I currently am leading a group, part of a group of white people of faith in predominantly white congregations who meet every other Monday to talk about what our role is in dismantling white supremacy. We are currently listening to a podcast. So we listen to an episode and then we meet the following meeting time to discuss it. That is it's called Reclaiming My Theology from White Supremacy. Really great podcast. That's actually one season of the podcast. Reclaiming My Theology, White Supremacy is one season. There's a whole lot of good stuff there, but it is very Christian focused, and so there's some real strong differences, and so it would be really interesting to kind of have that discussion from a UU basis. That being said, anybody here who is interested in joining our every other Monday group, you can email me, adam@icucpico.com. I'll put it in the chat, and I'll send you the info. We'll meet next Monday, and I'll send you the next podcast and all that. But I think that would be a really a real powerful thing to do here at UUCR. And so thank you for bringing that up, Tika.
Great, thank you, Adam. And now Lee is next.
Did you call on me, Alec?
Yes, Lee, please share your
Yeah. I was wondering, it's also important when we're talking about privilege and discrimination and all those things to recognize that it's a whole spectrum of things, not only tied to race, but to economics, to oppression of the privileged over those who have not, who struggle every day, and solidarity among those who are struggling and oppressed should actually cross racial lines, and one could easily see that those who are in power and who are partaking in oppression would gladly divide us along racial lines if they could, in order, divide and conquer, the old imperial story, right? So doing away with discrimination, upholding everyone, not excluding everyone, not having in-group, out-group moralities based on ancient religions and all that stuff is much more than just race. It encompasses a whole lot more, doesn't it?
Yes, thank you, Lee. We have John and then Jenny, and then we will have time for perhaps one comment after that as a heads up.
Okay, I mentioned this because many people may remember that a few years ago, the UUA was in big trouble for our hiring practices. White people were being hired over more qualified other minority qualified people. It got so bad the UUA president was forced to actually resign. This is being brought forward now by the Black Lives Universal Unitarian Organization because enough progress is being made, but they don't feel there's enough progress being made. So that's why they think this is the time for this principle now.
Thank you, John. And finally, Jenny, please.
Yes, hi. I'm new to the group, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak. But the question, I would say that, like, in sort of follow up with what Tinka mentioned of some tools I would like to learn is ways to call out racism and do it in a way that doesn't anger and alienate more, but helps those who are expressing things that feel racist to me, help them to open their minds and to perhaps find it in their hearts to be, less racist. And I struggle with that in a specific situation that I have here in my world. Anyway, I would love to see something like that included in conversations. Also, one other thing, I was just looking at your website and it says you have 7 principles listed there. I couldn't find the 8th one, so I'll look that up.
Yes, you'll find the 8th principle on the UUA's website. We have not yet put it on ours since the nationwide, so the UUA Unitarian Universalist Association is the nation level organization, and there will eventually be an official vote where I'm not entirely sure who gets to vote, but presumably UUs, and we will then choose to adopt the 8th principle or not. But yes, thank you for your comments, Jenny. Tinka will be next, but I wanted to quickly say that my experience is even with myself, is that, I think about, the issues that white supremacists cause. People who do on some level still hold that belief that white people are somehow better or more deserving. And I think about them like, yeah, those white people, why are they ruining it? But I can't say that because it's almost like I can somehow see myself as separate from that group of white people, and yet I also get to, when it comes down to if I'm talking to a police officer or anything, I'm perfectly happy to subsume that identity. And so just having that conversation, even if when someone doesn't recognize that they are saying something racist, even just subconsciously, just identifying, breaking down that barrier of, there are people who are like you, who maybe if they said something like what you just said, that would clearly be racist. And just phrasing that conversation of not you specifically, but imagine somebody like you making a comment like that. Tinka, thank you.
Yes, I'm hoping, like Jenny, what you were talking about, that if we could form, if we do create this, 6 or 8 week or whatever, ongoing dialogue, sharing, introspection, like a part of it might be reading these, like book reading these kinds of things to broaden our view. But I wasn't looking necessarily like a book club. It was really the focus being on us and growth of us as individuals, and then also as a community. And part of that, I would think, would also be, how do I, what do I, we would be sharing, it would be experiential. We would be sharing it and what worked with some people and, what didn't with others, and our path, our journey, a lot of that as well. And so some of those things might come out. And then also for Jenny and for others that are new, I just wanted to explain in terms of our polity, the way that decisions are made in not only in our congregation, but in the denomination, that it's representative. It's like a representative democratic style. And so every year there is a GA, which is a General Assembly, and anyone can come to our General Assemblies, and it's made up of individual UU people from all around, from the United States, all over the United States and Canada, coming together, and that things are put forth to be voted on. So they wouldn't be formally included in something until we had this representative gathering, and the representatives, the delegates from each individual church that would be there. Each church is allowed to have delegates. The number of delegates is determined by the size of your congregation. And then that would be presented, talks would happen, and then a voting would occur. But a lot of stuff has to happen before it comes to that. And part of that is each congregation needs to have sort of a discussion, and because otherwise how will the person who is your delegate know what that congregation, in terms of their vote, what to do. So I just wanted to sort of explain a little bit about how that happens. And so things that are printed as official part of our religion and beliefs within our religion won't happen until we have that type of discussion and that type of voting, that would occur. So I just wanted to kind of explain that. Thanks.
Thank you, Tinka. I think we're getting close to our 10-minute mark past the hour. And so I think, unfortunately, we don't have a coffee hour to go to, but once again, I would like to extend the invitation to join us at the worship committee meeting, which is open to anybody who would like to join if you have something you'd like to say about how the worship services are planned. And it will be at the same Zoom link as the one we're using here, and it will start in about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And don't forget that next Sunday we will be opening back up in person, so please feel free to show up here. The Zoom service will still be playing, but we are reopening our doors since the COVID wave is on the downward trend. Happier days to come. Thank you for joining us.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody, tomorrow.
Oh yes, and happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you, Alec.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.